Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover the tragedy play Iphigenia at Aulis by Euripides. This play is contained in Book 6 from my 2025 reading list. Well, this was the final play that Euripides wrote. He wrote it in 408, he passed away in 406 BC, and then it was performed after that in Athens. Aeschylus and Sophocles, the two other great Greek playwrights, they also wrote works called Iphigenia, but they did not survive. And so we have this one that survives from Euripides, and we also have another one about Iphigenia kind of later on in her life, which is called Iphigenia at Tauris, also by Euripides. And I covered that in a previous episode. I'll link to that in the show notes. But they kind of cover two different parts of Iphigenia's life. And when I think of Greek tragedy, this is one of the most tragic stories for me. I know there are characters, there are people who perhaps suffered more, but this story is just so gut-wrenching. And it's so interesting. It plays into the Iliad. The timeline of the story itself in mythology takes place before the Iliad, and it's contained in what's called the Cypria. So there was this Trojan epic cycle of 8 works, and the Iliad and the Odyssey were 2 of those 8 works. And so these 8 works would have known these 8 works at that time, and only 2 of them survive. So we've lost 6 of them, but we know what's in the other 6. And so the Iliad is book or work number 2 out of that 8, and then the Odyssey is work number 7. And so there's something that precedes the Iliad, and then there's a bunch in the middle, and so we're missing parts of the story. And one of the big shocks when people read the Iliad is that the Trojan horse is not in the Iliad, and we all assume it is, but it would have been in one of those works in the middle. So the Cypria, this work that would have been work number 1 of this 8-work epic cycle, contains the story of Iphigenia. The work number 2 of the Iliad does not mention Iphigenia. Homer totally leaves her out. And it's interesting to note that. So there's a lot of debate. Did Homer know and just kind of leave it out? Or did he not know about this story? And so it's kind of a fun thing to consider. But we don't hear about what takes place in this play in the Iliad, but there are tremendous ramifications for what is happening in the Iliad, and it actually helps the Iliad make more sense, especially in Agamemnon and Achilles in their battle, in their relationship. So let me set the stage here for this story. Helen has been taken. Helen of Troy has been abducted or kidnapped, or willingly she went with Paris. There's different sides of that story. And so, but Helen is gone, and Helen is now in Troy with Paris, and her ex-husband Menelaus is upset. The Greeks have assembled themselves, and they are now in 1,000 ships, and they're sailing towards Troy to get Helen back. But they stop at Aulis on the way there, and they can't proceed. And the reason they can't proceed is there is no wind to push the sails of these 1,000 ships. And so they're stuck. There's nothing they can do. And this play is just filled with allusions to the quietness, and there's no wind, and birds aren't even singing, and there's no waves. And it's just throughout this play, you get the sense that everything is just still. And, there's this angst to get to war, to get Helen back, to avenge what's happened, and yet they can't. And the reason they can't is Agamemnon has killed a sacred deer in Aulis, and it is sacred to Artemis. And Artemis is punishing the Greeks by removing the wind so that they cannot sail out. So the Greeks receive an oracle that a sacrifice is required. And this is not an ordinary sacrifice. It's not an animal sacrifice. Agamemnon, the king of the Greeks, must sacrifice his own daughter, and his daughter's name is Iphigenia. So that's where we get Iphigenia for this play. So now we've got this situation where a father who is also the king must decide, will he sacrifice his own daughter? Will he kill his own daughter to appease Artemis so that the Greek army can proceed and sail to Troy. So perfect setup for a tragedy. I always define tragedy as damned if you do and damned if you don't. There's actually a great definition right in this work where Agamemnon says this: "It is a terrible thing for me to carry out this act, my wife, and terrible if I do not. It is the same for me in either case." End quote. And that's just a perfect definition of tragedy. It puts people in an impossible situation. So here, Agamemnon, if he sacrifices his daughter, his army can proceed. They can go to Troy. If he doesn't sacrifice his army, he risks his throne in essence, because the Greeks will find someone else who will take them to Troy or do what's necessary to take them to Troy. And we'll get into that a little bit more in this episode. But in this particular play, and there's debate as to whether Euripides wrote the whole thing. There's a possibility that he passed away before he finished this one, and then someone else wrote the ending or different parts of it. So the ending of this one, and if you haven't read it and you don't want a spoiler, maybe hit pause until you've read it. But the ending is that at the very last minute, as Iphigenia is about to get sacrificed, she is whisked away by the goddess Artemis, and a deer is put there in her place. So it has if that sounds familiar, very similar to the Abraham-Isaac story, where at the last minute, a ram is stuck in the thicket, and Abraham does not need to sacrifice his son Isaac, but there's a ram there in its place. So it makes for a very interesting ending. I'm not sure if that was the original ending or if the sacrifice had gone through to where Iphigenia is killed, because the winds do come back and then the Greeks are able to sail to Troy. I'm torn on this because I think for the sake of the play, Iphigenia almost has to die. Like, everything is building up to this, and then for her to be whisked away at the last minute kind of is It doesn't fit, and it's kind of a cheap ending in that way, and yet Euripides' other play, Iphigenia at Tauris, is exactly that she's been whisked away by Artemis and is now the priestess for Artemis in Tauris, and so perhaps a little bit of both. Most of the other works that I've read that allude to this play or this story, Iphigenia, the assumption is that she was sacrificed. So I almost wonder, like, if it was just too terrible for the audience, like if Euripides or whoever wrote the end of that was just like, I don't think the audience can handle Iphigenia getting killed here, and so they kind of make this thing where she gets saved at the last moment. But either way, she is saved in this play. But most of the other references to this story is that she was actually sacrificed. So this one is my favorite of all of Euripides' plays. I've read 16 or 17 of them now. I just have a few remaining. He's got 19 that survived. And I love this story. I love how it hits on so many common themes you see throughout the tragedy plays. It introduces a scene that we only know bits and pieces about, and it's from that Cypria. So we just, a lot of things reference it, but here you have it in flesh. Like, you have this fleshed out. What were the conversations like? What was it like for Agamemnon? And as I pondered the story, hearing about it over the past couple years, I just kind of wondered, like, what was going through Agamemnon's head? Did his wife know? What was she thinking? And so all those questions are answered in a way in this play. The last thing is it calls the entire Trojan War into question, because it becomes an issue of direction and a question of what was the cost. So the cost was Iphigenia's life for Helen's return. And so it shows the cost of war and the effect upon the victorious, that it's not just all glory and honor and all that, but there is a huge cost to both sides of a war, but even to the victors, there is a tremendous cost. And you see this throughout other stories in Greek literature, especially after the Trojan War, just of the cost to the Greeks, not just the Trojans. So just kind of the terrible aspect of war on all sides, and even amidst this glory and the bronze and the shining and the honor, there's tragedy all around, and there's tragedy in the most innocent of places, in Iphigenia. So the version I read of this one was the Penguin Classics, and that was translated by John Davy. And then the intro and the notes were by Dr. Richard Rutherford. I also got the Oxford World's Press version of this story as well. I've not looked at that one or the notes on that one, but I do plan to read this a second time just because I liked it so much, and I also enjoy seeing what other people put in their introductions. So there'll be 2 more segments in this episode. In the next segment 2, I'll go into a little more detail about Iphigenia at Aulis, and then in segment 3, I'll cover the one thing that I'm still thinking about after reading this tragedy play. Well, if you've listened to any of my other episodes on some of these tragedy plays, you know that there are 3 or 4 things that I look at the beginning of each play and then just kind of have them in my mind as I'm reading through it. And the 4 things are: who is the chorus, what is the location, who is the first speaker, and then what is the mythological time frame in which this story takes place. So let's just go through those quickly. The chorus is made up of women from Chalcis in Euboea, and I probably butchered those pronouncements. I'm sorry. I've not heard many of these words pronounced, so I'm just reading them, and I probably mispronounce a lot of them. But Chalcis is right across the strait from Aulis, and so the chorus is made up of women from this town just right across the way. And it's interesting to consider because all of the people at Aulis are men, because they're on their way to Troy to fight the war. So these are the Greek men, the Greek warriors. Yes, they would have had other people with them, but all the people that we're considering are men, and yet Iphigenia is a woman. Clytemnestra comes, and she is the mother of Iphigenia, and so you have women come, but then for the chorus to be made of women is just kind of a nice counterpart to all of the men that are kind of the focus of this particular tragedy play. The location is Aulis, and again, Aulis is the Greeks are on their way from Athens to. I assume from Athens to Troy, and Aulis is on the way, and it's slightly northwest of Athens. The first speaker is Agamemnon, but this is a very unique situation where usually in tragedy plays we have a prologue, and it's usually just one speaker, and that will either be a person or a god, but they set the whole stage for this play. This one's unique in that it's kind of a back and forth between Agamemnon and this character that's called the Old Man. And so you have a dialogue instead of just kind of a monologue. And so that makes this one interesting. You kind of see the playwrights experimenting with different things. So there's a framework for tragedy plays and how they're put together. But you see this experimentation, and it's kind of fun to note those types of things. And then the time frame, as I mentioned earlier, this is right before the Iliad, right before the Greeks head over to Troy for the Trojan War. For the parts of the story, again, I had heard about Iphigenia in so many different references in other Greek tragedies, and then other books on Greek mythology that I'd been reading, and so I knew the outline of the story. I knew that Iphigenia was sacrificed, but I didn't know the details. And so I wanted to highlight some of the things I didn't know, and then what I learned in this play. And it's tricky. Like, a lot of times there's not like just, okay, here's the one story about this Greek myth or something like that, but there's different takes on it, and especially in the tragedy plays, these playwrights are kind of riffing on the story. So, but this is how it's presented in this book. And so one of my first questions was, and especially as a father myself, like, did Agamemnon have inner turmoil about this? Or was it just straight like, okay, I am the king. We need to battle the Trojans. Mission first. Anyone in the way is gone, even if they are my daughter. So what was Agamemnon thinking about all this? And so I found it interesting. His initial response, right towards the beginning of the play, when he finds out that he is required to kill his daughter, his initial response is to dismiss the army, to call the whole thing off. Like he's not going to do it. He's not going to kill his daughter for the sake of this war. He gets talked out of that. The very next thing he does is, so before that, he has written a letter to Clytemnestra, his wife, and says, hey, please come to Aulis. Please bring Iphigenia, and there will be a wedding. Iphigenia is going to marry Achilles. And so Achilles has no idea about any of this. Agamemnon is using this story about marriage to Achilles to get Clytemnestra and Iphigenia to come. So that's the first letter. But Agamemnon writes a second letter. And in this letter to Clytemnestra, his wife, he's begging her not to come. So he has a change of heart in that sense of he does not want to kill his daughter. So he's begging his wife not to come, not to bring Iphigenia. And Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother, intercepts that letter and stops it from being sent. A few pages later, Agamemnon says, I will not kill my own children. But he's talked into it, and I'll get into the arguments in the very next part. But it was interesting to me just to see kind of this turmoil and this angst within Agamemnon on how to handle this situation. My next big question was Clytemnestra there? You read the Oresteia, and you see when Clytemnestra ends up killing Agamemnon after the Trojan War, his homecoming, he comes home and his wife murders him. And this is a big part of the reason why of his sacrificing of Iphigenia. So I just kind of had that, like, was Clytemnestra at home during all this? And she kind of heard about it later. Was she at Aulis? And so what this play does is put her at Aulis. So she comes to Aulis. She's there, and yes, she's in the midst of this. She's finding out. She actually finds out before Agamemnon knows that she knows that Agamemnon is about to sacrifice their daughter. There is dialogue between them. It is heart-wrenching. Clytemnestra in this play is actually quite pleasant, quite different than what we know her later, especially in Aeschylus and the Oresteia. But it makes sense. She's had 10 years by that point to stew on the fact that her husband has sacrificed their daughter. My other big question that was answered here is, does Clytemnestra try to stop Agamemnon from doing this? And if so, how? And did they talk about this and that kind of thing? And so you see that in this play. I want to cover the arguments that Agamemnon makes. How do you justify killing your own child? And so here are the arguments that Agamemnon gave for that. And the first one is that he fears the army. He fears the Greek army. Clytemnestra calls him a coward for this, but there's this aspect if he doesn't go through with this, that the Greek army will be so upset that either they get rid of him as king, or perhaps worse, maybe they kill him. So there's this fear in that sense, and that's kind of one of the arguments, and it's actually brought up by Clytemnestra in saying that that's one of the reasons that Agamemnon wants to go through with this. But there are a couple other arguments, and the first one here is interesting. So here's the first one, and it's basically Agamemnon is talking about the Trojan warriors, and he points to Helen and says that the Trojans have stolen Helen. And if we let this stand, if we don't go and battle them at their area, at their location, they will continue doing this, and they will continue to where they steal all the women, they kill all the men. And so if you don't die, we will all die. And so that's Agamemnon's argument there. If Iphigenia is not sacrificed and the winds don't pick back up to where they can go, Iphigenia will end up dying anyway, but then everyone else will end up dying. And it's an interesting argument, but that's one of the reasons that Agamemnon kind of shifts his mind and starts thinking that, yes, this is something that needs to be done. But then he goes further and he talks about Greece. And he says this: "It is not Menelaus who has turned me into a slave, my child, nor his desire that guides my actions, but Greece. To her, whether I wish it or not, I am bound to offer you in sacrifice. Against this I have no power. Greece must be free. As far as you and I, my child, can bring it about, we are Greeks and must not let foreigners use violence against our wives and carry them off." End quote. So you see that argument I mentioned before too. If we don't do this, if we don't take the battle to them, the battle will come to us. We will all die. But then also we need to do this for Greece. And so there's kind of this pointing to this higher thing of Greece and the freedom of Greece and all that. So just interesting to note, how does a father get to the point of being okay with sacrificing his daughter? And you kind of see how these arguments begin to work on Agamemnon. Now, let me just cover a few themes that show up in this tragedy play. And these are themes that I see quite often in Greek tragedy, in the Iliad and the Odyssey and things like that. So the first is deliberation versus force. And I use those terms a lot. Just I usually call it like Ares versus Areopagus. So Ares would be force, the god of war, versus Areopagus. In that Oresteia, we learn that Athena, the goddess Athena, has established democracy, law, deliberation, courts, as opposed to just ruling by force. And so here's a part where Achilles is talking to Clytemnestra. And remember, Achilles was set to be married to Iphigenia. And Achilles doesn't know this at first, but then finds out. And so Achilles and Clytemnestra are trying to figure out ways for this to not go through so that Iphigenia is not sacrificed. So Achilles says this to Clytemnestra: "Beg him," so him being Agamemnon, "beg him first not to kill the child. If he resists, you must come to me. If you succeed in your request, there is no need for me to intervene. Your safety is assured. I shall be on better terms with my friend, and the army would not blame me if I resolve this matter by deliberation rather than by force." End quote. I just think that's so interesting because he's trying to get Clytemnestra to use deliberation with Agamemnon, to try to use persuasion first, and that would be more legit than using force. And so you see this over and over, but just that deliberation versus force idea shows up here in a very strong way. The next theme, and I'll cover 5 themes here. The next one is that the innocent suffer. And that's probably one of the biggest lessons out of the tragedy plays. The people who perpetrate the tragedies, the people that perpetrate the evil, they oftentimes do not suffer. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes it's the innocent who suffer. And that's just it's part of the tragedy. It's part of the awfulness about the whole thing is that the innocent, and in this case Iphigenia, this virgin, this woman who is this young girl who's come to Iphigenia on the hopes of getting married to Greece's greatest warrior, and the shift there of, no, you're actually, this is not a marriage, this is your sacrifice. Another theme that shows up quite a bit in Greek literature is that of necessity. And so Agamemnon uses this as an argument of why he must do what he does. And necessity is a goddess or a god. And so there's this idea that you just, there are things that are outside of your control. There is, whether it's a divine will or fate, there's something that is acting that requires you to do certain things. And so here's Agamemnon, just in pain, just speaking. And here's what he says: "Oh, what a pain! What a wretch I am! What can I say? Where begin? Necessity's harsh yoke is on my shoulders. Destiny has stolen up on me and proved subtler by far than my subtle plans. There is some advantage in being of humble birth." And I'll stop reading there, but you see him. Necessity's harsh yoke is on my shoulders, and he almost feels like he has to do this. The fourth big theme is just kind of I'll say Helen versus Iphigenia, and so it's kind of the whore versus the virgin, or the corrupt wife versus the innocent maid, and just that contrast, kind of tying into the second theme of the innocent suffering. But just you've got the good wife versus the bad wife. You've got these different comparisons throughout Greek literature. And the last theme is an interesting one, and it's the light. And it is Iphigenia's appeal before she gives the okay for her to be sacrificed. She kind of does this self-sacrificial thing that also shows up quite often in Greek tragedy with the innocent. But there's this appeal first to let her live, and her appeal is to the light. And so let me read her plea here. "Oh, hear my appeal. Take pity on my young life. Yes, by your beard we beseech you, both loving you well, the one a fledgling still, and other full grown. I will win my case by summing it all up in one plea. The greatest joy for mortals is to look upon the light of this world. The netherworld is nothing. Mad is the man who prays for death. A sorry life is better than a noble death." End quote. So a few things going on there. She's appealing to her father, Agamemnon, and appealing with her one plea. The greatest joy for mortals is to look upon the light of this world. So do not kill her so that she can still see the light. So that's the other theme is that of light. Let me close out this section here, segment 2, with Iphigenia's just utterly devastating speech. And again, this is to Agamemnon just a little bit before what I just read. "If I had the eloquence of Orpheus," and Orpheus is a poet, "if I had the eloquence of Orpheus, father, charming rocks to follow me at my song and bewitching with my words whoever I pleased, I would have taken that course. But as it is, I will only offer the only art I possess, my tears. That is within my power. Like a suppliant's branch, I press against your knees this body of mine that this woman bore to you. Do not destroy me before my time. It is sweet to gaze on the light. Do not force me to see the underworld. I was the first to call you father, as you first called me daughter. I was the first to hug your knees, to give loving caress and receive them in turn. These were your words at that time. O my child, shall I see you happy in some husband's home, alive and blooming to bring me honor? Then I would reply, my hand clinging to your beard as it now clasps you. What state shall I find you in? Shall I welcome you into my home with loving hospitality, father, when you are old? Shall I make you a proper return for the effort and care you spent on my upbringing?" I'll close it there, but gosh, what a devastating... You just imagine her hugging the knees of her father and pleading with him with that speech. Whew. Now into segment 3 and the one thing, my one key takeaway from this work, Iphigenia at Aulis. And let me just take a step back here for a minute and talk about the Greek works, the epic poems, the tragedy plays, the things that I've read so far from this time. It's like a puzzle, and all the puzzle pieces they slowly come together. And I actually started this process by reading Mythology by Edith Hamilton, and that kind of just gives you an overview of all of Greek mythology, and that was very helpful. But it's also like drinking out of a fire hose, a fire hydrant, and it's so much you don't remember it. And so, as I'm reading different Greek works, it's just like all these different puzzle pieces coming together in Greek mythology, where you see how one story interacts with another, how one story, you can read one story and get a lot out of it, and then you read kind of the story before that, and it just offers new ways to look at it, new insights, new things to ponder. And it's made for some of the most exciting and enjoyable reading in my life, just to have this kind of, it keeps giving. It just keeps going, and you can just go deeper and deeper into this world of Greek mythology, and it's exhilarating. And I'm scared of getting to the end of these tragedy plays, just knowing that there aren't any more to read, just because they're so enjoyable, and the deeper you go in, the more fun it gets. And so that ties into my one thing here, is that this play, Iphigenia at Aulis, really helped me make sense of parts of the Iliad. especially the interactions between Agamemnon and Achilles. It also helped with giving insight into Clytemnestra, and when we come across her in the Oresteia, when we even in the Euripides play Orestes that I covered last week, you get insight into these characters that it makes things really make sense, and I love that. And so in the Iliad, you see this anger between Agamemnon and Achilles, and Agamemnon at one point takes the slave girl of Achilles, Briseis. And you just see Achilles it almost seems over the top. Like this is a woman that he just got in battle, and Agamemnon takes her, and he acts like, he's been married to this woman for 40 years and the love of his life and all this. But when you look at it through this lens of Agamemnon, right before this in Aulis, Agamemnon had promised a wife to Achilles, and there's a big portion of this play where Achilles is getting excited. At first he doesn't know anything about this, and then he finds out that he's to marry Iphigenia, and he sees her honor, he sees what a woman she is, and he starts getting excited about this prospect of getting married to Iphigenia, and then that is taken from him, and under just the worst of circumstances, she's sacrificed. It just puts Achilles in this terrible situation. And so if you bring that knowledge into the Iliad, it helps that make so much more sense. Agamemnon taking Briseis in the Iliad is now the second time that he has stolen a woman from Achilles. So it's not just, I just got this slave girl in a battle and what a jerk Agamemnon, but it's like, okay, this is a pattern. Agamemnon keeps doing this. I'm not taking it anymore. And so it just offers like this next level of, okay, now I'm understanding the interactions between Agamemnon and Achilles in the Iliad. Now I'm understanding why there's such anger, where this anger came from. And so, yes, there could be just enough anger within the Iliad itself, but kind of knowing this backstory and seeing what took place pretty close before this. It's one of those things that I love about Greek tragedy and Greek mythology and Greek works. It's just kind of these puzzle pieces all coming together. For the ending of this play, I wonder what Euripides' ending really was, because the Oresteia by Aeschylus, it doesn't make as much sense if Iphigenia was rescued at the last minute, because then Clytemnestra wouldn't have that against Agamemnon. You do have that other play by Euripides where Iphigenia was saved, and I almost think that maybe that was his olive branch, or just way to show like, hey, maybe this didn't happen, and if it didn't happen, if she wasn't really sacrificed, here's what would have happened. But this play it almost made it to where you have to end it with her sacrifice, no matter how horrible that is and how horrible that would have been for the audience. And so I just wonder if that ending was put in by someone else, just because the entire play is moving towards that thing. And it's almost like a letdown. And it's just even a weird thing to say that, like you want Iphigenia to live, but it's like, it's almost a letdown in the story, just of everything leading to that. And then, oh, poof, she's whisked away. Oh, wow. So here's what I appreciated in this play. I loved there are just these continual references to a lack of wind. There's one part where it says there is no sound. There's actually on the very first page. There is no sound either of birds or of the sea. The windless silence prevails. And then I just loved, like, again, we get snippets of this, but in different plays, but like to see the whole story, and then just even having Clytemnestra and Iphigenia find out what Agamemnon is going to do to them before Agamemnon knows that they know. It's just brilliant drama, brilliant writing, brilliant way of putting these pieces together. And I loved that. I love kind of looking into stories in a deeper way like this. So in conclusion, this is a tragedy in the extreme. you've got a father having to sacrifice his own daughter for the sake of the city, the people. What do you do? What do you do in that situation? Again, this is the extreme. So sometimes we look at stories like this and like, this is so far from reality. Like, when would we ever have to sacrifice our kids for the greater good or something like that? But I found myself thinking of my own daughters and like, what do I sacrifice them for? Like, what in my work or my activities or different, like, where are they being sacrificed? And so, yes, this tragedy is the full extreme, a father having to kill his daughter, but like, what are small little things that I'm doing on a daily basis that are similar? And I've found myself asking that a lot in tragedy amidst these just like horrible things that are happening. It's like, well, what, like on a smaller level, what is similar to that? Because I connect with these stories, but why? They're so outrageous, but there's something about it. And there's some level that I think we can all relate to in this, and you know, hopefully not the full extreme or even close to that, but like, are there parts that you find yourself like, oh man, how am I doing this to my own kids? Like, how am I messing with them? Or another part in conclusion here is just how it really shifts the story of the entire Trojan War, in the sense of, as it's put in the introduction, it turns the narrative of the virtuous Greeks and the depraved barbarians on its head. So you've got this, the Trojans, you know, the bad ones, or just in Greek literature in general, it's always the Greeks versus the barbarians, and the Greeks are always the virtuous ones. But how are you virtuous if the very beginning of the war is to kill your own daughters, to sacrifice the innocent? What does that say for the rest of the war? And finally, in conclusion here, this is a great companion to the Iliad. So I would read the Iliad and the Odyssey first, but then come back to this, and it helps fill out that story. It helps things to make sense within the Iliad itself. I want to close here reading two parts that I thought were just beautiful. The first is a part that the chorus sings, and this is a part about marriage. Blessed are those whom Aphrodite is gentle, who share in the due measure in the bliss of marriage, enjoying a spirit of calm, untroubled by mad passions. For when golden-haired Eros bends his bow with arrows twofold in charm, one is for a destiny of happy days, the other for life's ruin. O fair Cyprian, keep this fate far from my bedchamber. May the delights of love visit me in due measure, and my desires be pure. May I know Aphrodite in moderation. I want none of her rage. End quote. It almost has the feel of like a chorus in the Song of Solomon's Song of Solomon. Just kind of the good things and the potential bad things of love, and in this case, desire. So let me finish with one other quote here. Where can the face of modesty, the face of virtue, prevail when godlessness holds sway and mortals put virtue behind them, paying her no regard, when lawlessness controls laws and men make no common effort to keep heaven's anger at bay? End quote. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. I would love to hear from you if you've read Euripides, if you've read this play, Iphigenia and Aulis. I'd love to hear if I missed something or something that you got out of this tragedy play that I didn't cover. It always fascinates me, just as each of us approach a work, we get so many different things out of them. I don't think we get... maybe there's common themes that people get out of works, but it's like our unique approach, the things we've read, our life experience, all gives us kind of a unique view into each work. So please comment if you have something that you want to share. Please comment on the Substack note about this episode, the post for this episode, because then other people can see that, they can respond to it. We can kind of get a conversation going there. As for what I'm currently reading, I'm closing out the rest of the plays by Euripides, and that will probably take the remainder of the month of May here. So looking forward to that. Also kind of bummed that I'm reaching the end of the tragedies. I decided to read all of them. I was planning on just reading a couple by each author, but I just fell in love and decided to read all of them. You can follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, just at Books of Titans. Also, the website is stock full of resources to help you find the best books and to create your own reading list. So I have that at books.booksoftitans.com, and then the Substack for the podcast is at booksoftitans.com. I should be back next week to discuss another book or series from Euripides, another work, a tragedy play by Euripides. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.